The morning I found that gold nugget under my cabin floorboards, I thought I'd won the lottery. By sunset, I was fighting for my life against the people I'd called friends. It started when I was fixing a loose board in my one-room cabin just outside Deadwood. The wood had been creaking for weeks, driving me half crazy every time I walked across it. I pried up the plank with my knife, expecting to find rotted wood or maybe a dead rat. Instead, there it was, a nugget the size of a chicken egg, gleaming like a piece of the sun had fallen through my floor. My hands shook as I picked it up. The weight felt impossibly heavy for something so small. I'd been breaking my back in the silver mines for 3 years, barely scraping together enough coin for beans and coffee. And here was more money than I'd seen in my entire life, sitting right under my feet. I thought to myself, this changes everything. No more 12-hour shifts underground. No more eating stale bread for dinner. But then I heard Jake's voice outside my door. "Tom, you in there? We're heading to Murphy's for drinks." Jake Wilson was my mining partner, and the closest thing to family I had in this godforsaken town. We'd shared our last dollar more times than I could count. If anyone deserved to know about this discovery, it was him. I shoved the nugget into my pocket just as Jake pushed through my door without knocking. Like he always did. He was grinning, his face still black with mine dust. "Come on, partner. First round's on me tonight," he said, slapping my shoulder. I felt the nugget's weight pressing against my leg. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. I opened my mouth to tell him everything, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the way his eyes quickly scanned my cabin, taking in every detail. Maybe it was how his smile seemed a little too wide, a little too eager. Or maybe it was just plain fear that made me lie to the one person who'd always had my back. "Can't tonight, Jake. I'm feeling poorly," I said, forcing a cough. His smile faltered. "You sure? You look different. Just tired from the mine." Jake stared at me for a long moment, his head tilted like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Then he shrugged and headed for the door. "All right then, but you're buying tomorrow night." As soon as he left, I pulled out the nugget again. It caught the lamplight and threw golden shadows across my walls. I should have felt joy, relief, excitement. Instead, all I felt was a cold knot forming in my stomach, because I'd just lied to my best friend. And somehow, I knew that was only the beginning. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every few minutes I'd catch myself touching my pocket where I'd hidden the nugget, wrapped in an old cloth. I'd moved it from under the floorboard to my person, afraid to leave it anywhere. At the mine, Jake kept shooting me sideways glances. During our lunch break, he sat closer than usual on the wooden crate we used as a bench. "You've been acting strange since yesterday," he said, unwrapping his cheese sandwich. "Something happened at your place?" "Nothing happened," I said too quickly. Jake's eyes narrowed. "Tom, we've been partners for 3 years. I can tell when you're lying." I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Just been thinking about my future, that's all. Whether mining's really for me." It wasn't entirely a lie. The nugget had made me question everything. But Jake's expression darkened like I'd slapped him. "Your future? What about our partnership? What about the claim we've been working?" "I didn't say I was leaving," I said. But even as the words came out, I realized I was considering exactly that. With the nugget, I could disappear to California, maybe start fresh somewhere nobody knew my name. Jake stood up abruptly, his sandwich forgotten. "You know what? Keep your secrets, Tom. But don't expect me to pretend everything's normal when you're clearly planning something behind my back." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the growing weight in my pocket. That afternoon, things got worse. While Jake was hauling ore from the deeper tunnel, I noticed him talking to Red Murphy, the saloon owner, near the mine entrance. They were too far away for me to hear, but Red kept looking in my direction. My blood ran cold. Jake wouldn't tell Red about my strange behavior, would he? But as I watched them, I saw Jake gesture toward me and shake his head like he was frustrated. When the whistle blew at 5 o'clock, signaling the end of our shift, I tried to approach Jake, but he brushed past me without a word and headed straight for Murphy's saloon with 3 other miners. I wanted to follow him, to explain somehow, but I couldn't risk it. Not with the nugget burning a hole in my pocket and half the town likely to be at Murphy's tonight. Instead, I headed home, my mind racing with paranoid thoughts. What if Jake suspected something valuable? What if he'd noticed how I kept touching my pocket? What if he decided to search my cabin while I was gone? As I reached my door, I spotted movement in the shadows between the buildings across the street. Someone had been watching my place. My hand instinctively went to the nugget, and I realized with dawning horror that my secret might not be as safe as I'd thought. The question was, how many people were already starting to suspect that Tom Miller had stumbled onto something worth killing for? I barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin walls made me jump, expecting to find someone trying to break in. When dawn finally broke, I felt like I'd been run over by a mining cart. But my real nightmare was just beginning. I was barely dressed when I heard voices outside my window. Multiple voices. Angry ones. I peered through the dirty glass and felt my stomach drop. Jake stood in the middle of the street with 5 other miners, all of them staring directly at my cabin. Red Murphy was there too, along with Samuel Hayes, the town banker, and even Martha Wells from the general store. My hands trembled as I strained to hear what they were saying. "I'm telling you, something's not right with Tom," Jake's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "Yesterday he was acting like a man with a secret. A big one." "What kind of secret?" Red Murphy asked, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "The kind that makes a man lie to his best friend and start talking about leaving town sudden-like." I thought to myself, "Jake, you son of a bitch, how could you do this to me?" But then Samuel Hayes spoke up, and my blood turned to ice water. "You know, boys, I was thinking about what Jake told me last night. Tom Miller's been mining that same worthless claim for 3 years, never found so much as a silver flake. But yesterday, he came into my bank asking about procedures for, how did he put it, theoretical large deposits." The group went dead silent. I could practically see the gears turning in their heads. Martha Wells stepped forward, her voice sharp as a knife. "And he came by my store this morning, real early, asking about supplies for long-distance travel, paid in cash, which he ain't had in months. Son of a bitch found something," Red Murphy growled. "And he's planning to run off with it instead of sharing with his partner." I watched Jake's face change from confusion to understanding, to pure rage. The betrayal in his eyes was like a punch to the gut, but what came next was worse. "If Tom Miller struck gold on that claim, then half of it belongs to me by rights," Jake said, his voice getting louder. "We've been partners for 3 years. I've got as much claim to whatever he found as he does. Hell, if there's gold in these hills, we all deserve a piece," Samuel Hayes added. "Tom's been using tools from my hardware credit. That nugget was found with my equipment. And he's been buying supplies from my store on account." Martha chimed in. "I'd say I'm owed compensation too." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people had gone from suspicion to outright claiming ownership of something they weren't even sure existed. But the worst part was watching Jake nod along with every word. "You're right," Jake said finally. "Tom owes all of us." "Tom, and if he won't be reasonable about it." He let the threat hang in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Less than 24 hours ago, these were my neighbors, my friends, my partner. Now they were a mob, and I was their target. The nugget in my pocket felt heavier than ever. I was starting to understand why men killed each other over gold, because apparently, finding it was the easy part. Keeping it alive was going to be the real challenge. Within an hour, word had spread through Deadwood like wildfire. I could hear boots stomping up and down the street, voices getting louder and more aggressive as the crowd outside my cabin grew. I stayed away from the windows, but I could hear enough to know I was in serious trouble. "Tom Miller, we know you're in there," Jake's voice boomed outside my door. "Come out and let's talk like civilized men." I gripped my rifle tighter and called back. "There's nothing to talk about, Jake. You're trespassing on my property." A harsh laugh came from multiple throats. "Your property," Samuel Hayes shouted. "Built with materials bought on credit from my store. I'd say I own half this cabin, and the other half belongs to the bank," another voice added. "Tom's 3 months behind on his land payments." My throat went dry. I'd forgotten about the money I owed. In my excitement about the nugget, I'd completely overlooked the fact that I was technically squatting on borrowed time. Red Murphy's voice cut through the others like a rusty blade. "Here's how this is gonna work. Tom, you come out with whatever you found, we'll divide it fair and square, and everybody walks away happy. You stay in there acting like a greedy bastard, and we'll come in and take it anyway." "You can't just steal from me," I yelled back. But even as I said it, I realized how naive I sounded. "Steal?" Jake's voice was closer now, right outside my door. "Partner, after 3 years of splitting everything 50-50, You think you can just keep secrets and run off? That ain't stealing. That's justice. I heard the scrape of metal against wood. Someone was trying to pry at my door latch. Tom, you got 10 seconds to open this door, Red Murphy called out. After that, we're coming in whether you like it or not. I thought about the nugget in my pocket, about the new life it could buy me, about getting out of this hellhole town forever. But I also thought about what would happen if I handed it over to this mob. They'd tear each other apart fighting over the shares, and I'd end up with nothing but their hatred. 5 seconds, Tom. My mind raced through my options. The back window was small, but I might be able to squeeze through. I could make a run for the hills, try to reach the next town. But that would mean leaving everything behind and becoming a fugitive. Time's up! The door exploded inward with a tremendous crash. Jake burst through first, followed by Red Murphy and 3 other miners I'd worked alongside for years. Their faces were twisted with greed and anger, and every one of them was armed. Where is it, Tom? Jake demanded, his pistol pointed at my chest. Where's the gold? I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking. Get out of my home, Jake, I mean it. Your home? Samuel Hayes stepped into the cabin behind the others. You're 2 weeks away from eviction, boy. This place belongs to the bank now. Strip search him, Red Murphy ordered, and tear this place apart board by board if you have to. As 6 pairs of hostile eyes fixed on me, I realized that the nugget had already cost me everything I'd thought was mine. My home, my partnership, my friends, and possibly my life. The question now wasn't whether I'd keep the gold. It was whether I'd live long enough to spend a single flake of it. Everything happened in a blur of violence and betrayal. Jake lunged forward to grab my rifle, but I swung it hard across his face. The crack of the wooden stock against his jaw echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. He staggered backward, blood streaming from his mouth, crashing into Red Murphy. Kill him! Jake screamed, spitting out a broken tooth. The greedy bastard attacked me. That's when I realized there would be no reasoning, no negotiating, no walking away from this. These men had convinced themselves they deserved my gold, and they were willing to commit murder to get it. I dove toward the back window as Samuel Hayes' pistol exploded behind me. The bullet splintered the window frame inches from my head. I threw myself through the opening, feeling glass slice across my arms and face as I tumbled into the dirt behind my cabin. Red Murphy's voice boomed from inside. He's running! Don't let that son of a bitch get away! I scrambled to my feet and sprinted toward the tree line, the nugget bouncing heavily in my pocket with each step. Behind me I could hear boots pounding across my cabin floor and men shouting orders. Circle around the gulch, Jake yelled, his voice thick from his broken jaw. Cut him off before he reaches the main trail. I thought to myself, 3 years of friendship. And now he's hunting me like a rabid dog. As I crashed through the underbrush, I could hear them spreading out behind me. These weren't just angry neighbors anymore. They were a pack of wolves who'd tasted blood and wouldn't stop until they brought down their prey. But what happened next made everything 10 times worse. A gunshot cracked through the forest, followed by Martha Wells' voice screaming from the direction of town. Help! Someone help me! They're robbing the bank! My blood turned to ice water. While Jake and his mob had been focused on me, someone else had taken advantage of the chaos. Samuel Hayes had left his bank unguarded to chase after my gold, and now other opportunists were looting it. Sam, your bank! Red Murphy shouted from somewhere in the trees behind me. I heard Samuel Hayes curse violently, then his voice carried through the forest. You 3 keep after Tom. Red, Jake, we're going back. The group was splitting up, but that didn't make me feel any safer. It meant 3 armed men were still hunting me while the rest of the town descended into complete lawlessness. As I stumbled through a creek bed, soaking my boots and pants, I realized the true horror of what my discovery had unleashed. The nugget hadn't just turned my friends against me, it had destroyed the entire social order of Deadwood. People were robbing banks, forming hunting parties, abandoning all pretense of civilization, and it was all because of the piece of gold burning in my pocket, like a piece of hell itself. I could hear my pursuers getting closer, their voices echoing off the canyon walls. But now I faced a terrible choice. Keep running and let the town tear itself apart, or go back and face almost certain death. Either way, I was starting to understand that some discoveries are too dangerous for any one man to make. I'd been running for what felt like hours when I realized I was trapped. The 3 miners still chasing me had driven me up into Dead Horse Canyon, where the walls rose straight up on both sides. The only way out was back the way I'd come, and they were blocking that path with rifles ready. My lungs burned like I'd been breathing acid. My shirt was soaked with sweat and blood from the glass cuts. Every step sent shooting pains through my legs. But I kept climbing higher into the rocks, hoping to find some kind of escape route. That's when I heard the voices echoing up from the canyon floor, and my heart nearly stopped. Tom Miller! It wasn't just the three miners anymore. It sounded like half the town had joined the hunt. We know you're up there. Ain't nowhere left to run. I pressed myself against the canyon wall and peered down. At least 15 people stood at the canyon mouth, all armed, all staring up at the rocks where I was hiding. Jake was there with his swollen, bloody face. Red Murphy had his shotgun. Samuel Hayes looked like he'd been in a fight at his own bank. But worst of all, there were faces I didn't recognize. Word had spread beyond Deadwood. Drifters, prospectors, and claim jumpers had materialized from nowhere, drawn by rumors of gold like vultures to a carcass. Listen up, Tom, Jake called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Town's gone to hell because of your greed. Martha Wells got shot in the bank robbery. 2 men are dead over claims that don't even exist. This is all your fault. My stomach twisted into knots. Martha Wells had always been kind to me, extending credit when I was broke, never asking for interest. Now she was bleeding because of the chain reaction I'd started. You got one choice, Samuel Hayes shouted. Come down with that gold and we'll make it quick. Stay up there and we'll smoke you out like a rat. I touched the nugget through my pocket. After everything that had happened, part of me wanted to just throw it down to them, let them fight over it and tear each other apart. At least then Martha Wells's blood wouldn't be on my conscience anymore. But I knew the truth now. Even if I gave them the gold, they couldn't let me live. I'd seen too much, knew too much about what they were capable of. Dead men don't tell tales about bank robberies and murders, as if reading my thoughts. Red Murphy called up to me. Don't think we're gonna let you walk away from this, Tom. You started a war in this town. Can't have witnesses walking around telling stories. I closed my eyes and tried to think. The canyon walls were too steep to climb. The only water was a thin trickle that wouldn't last long. They could wait me out, or they could start shooting and hope to get lucky. But then I heard something that chilled me to the bone. New voices, coming from the other end of the canyon. I was surrounded. Looks like more folks heard about your little treasure, Tom. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. Hope that nugget was worth dying for. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, I realized I was facing my final choice. Fight my way out and probably die in the attempt, or surrender and definitely die at their hands. Either way, the gold that had promised freedom had become my death sentence. And the worst part was knowing that even if I died tonight, the violence I'd unleashed would keep spreading through Deadwood like a plague until there was nothing left but blood and greed. As darkness fell over Dead Horse Canyon, I made the hardest decision of my life. I pulled the nugget from my pocket and held it up so the moonlight caught it. Even in the dim light, it gleamed like a piece of fallen star. The mob below went dead silent when they saw it. You want this gold? I shouted down to them. Come and get it. I hurled the nugget as hard as I could toward the far end of the canyon, where the new group of strangers had positioned themselves. The chunk of gold disappeared into the shadows with a distant clatter against stone. What happened next was exactly what I'd hoped for, and exactly what I'd feared. The mob exploded into chaos. Jake's group rushed toward where the nugget had landed, but the strangers were already scrambling over the rocks trying to find it. Within seconds, gunshots started popping like firecrackers as both groups opened fire on each other. It's mine! I saw where it landed, someone screamed. Like hell! We chased him up here! Jake roared back, firing his pistol blindly into the darkness. I used the confusion to start climbing down the opposite canyon wall, moving as quietly as I could while the two groups slaughtered each other below. Bodies were dropping on both sides, but their greed was stronger than their sense of self-preservation. Red Murphy went down first, Samuel Hayes' shotgun blast taking him center mass. But Hayes didn't have time to celebrate before a rifle bullet from one of the drifters punched through his chest. I thought to myself, this is what I've done. Turned neighbors into killers over a piece of rock. As I reached the canyon floor, I could see Jake silhouetted against the rocks, still firing at shadows. His face was a mask of blood and madness, no trace left of the man who'd shared his last dollar with me just yesterday. A bullet whined past my ear as I sprinted for the canyon mouth. Behind me, the gunfight was reaching its crescendo. Men were screaming, dying, killing each other over gold they couldn't even see in the darkness. I didn't look back. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my boots pounding against the rocky ground as the sounds of violence faded behind me. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, the canyon was silent except for the wind. 16 people had chased me into Dead Horse Canyon. I was the only one who came out alive. But as I stumbled back toward what was left of Deadwood, I realized my nightmare wasn't over. Smoke was rising from the town center. The bank robbery had turned into something worse. Buildings were burning, and I could hear distant gunshots as the chaos I'd started continued to spread. The nugget was gone, buried somewhere in that canyon along with everyone who died trying to claim it. But the damage was done. Deadwood was eating itself alive. And it was all because Tom Miller had gotten greedy and found something he should have left buried. I reached the outskirts of Deadwood, just as the general store collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. The town I'd called home for 3 years was dying. Bodies lay scattered in the streets. Windows were shattered, doors hung off their hinges, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with burning wood filled the air. Martha Wells sat on the steps of what used to be her store, clutching a bloody bandage to her shoulder. When she saw me, her face twisted with a mixture of pain and rage. "Tom Miller," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Look what you've done." I knelt beside her, guilt crushing down on my chest like a boulder. "Martha, I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." She laughed bitterly. "Sorry? 15 people are dead, Tom. 15. All because you couldn't share what you found like a decent human being." I wanted to tell her about the canyon, about how Jake and the others had killed each other fighting over the gold. But what was the point? The damage was already done. "Where will you go now?" she asked. I looked around at the burning ruins of Deadwood, at the broken dreams and shattered lives scattered like ashes in the wind. "I don't know. Somewhere no one knows my name." "Good," Martha said, struggling to her feet. "Because if I ever see you again, I'll put a bullet in you myself." I helped her up despite her protests, then walked to my cabin one last time. The door hung open, splintered and broken. Everything inside had been destroyed in the search for more gold. My few possessions lay scattered and ruined across the floor. I gathered what little I could carry and loaded it onto my horse. As I mounted up, I took one last look at the town I'd helped destroy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd found enough gold to set me up for life, but I'd lost everything that made life worth living. My friends, my home, my conscience, all buried in Dead Horse Canyon along with that cursed nugget. As I rode away from Deadwood, I made myself a promise. I'd never speak of what happened here. I'd never tell anyone about the gold, or the men who died for it, or the town that tore itself apart over a piece of rock. Some discoveries, I'd learned, are too dangerous for any one man to make, and some secrets are worth taking to the grave. 3 months later, I found work in a silver mine outside Denver. I keep my head down, do my job, and never talk about my past. The other miners think I'm just another drifter looking for an honest wage. They're not wrong. The Tom Miller who found that nugget died in Dead Horse Canyon along with everyone else. What's left is just a ghost, carrying the weight of 15 graves and a lesson learned too late. Gold might make you rich, but greed will always make you poor. And sometimes, the price of wealth is everything you thought you valued.